Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Renstrom Astrology, and I want to welcome you to my 2026 forecast, where I will be describing the year's most outstanding planetary aspects. However, if you want a deep dive into how these aspects apply specifically to your sign, I'll be covering all of that during my 2026 Forecast live stream series, which begins on Saturday, November 29th and continues over the following 3 Saturdays. This is where I will be breaking down the signs, season by season, spring signs, summer signs, autumn signs, and winter signs. These sessions are available to anyone who subscribes to the $10 tier of Christopher Renstrom Astrology Salon. What I like about this format is that I get to take your questions live and talk to you one-on-one, something I can't really do on the general channel. And let's say you're interested in only tuning in for your sign. You're welcome to subscribe for just that and cancel right afterwards, whatever works best for you. I want to remind you that all proceeds, subscriptions, super thanks, and donations go toward bringing you weekly episodes of Christopher Renstrom Astrology. Now, let's go ahead and talk about those outstanding planetary aspects for 2026. On January 20th, Saturn forms a sextile to Uranus. Saturn in the zodiac sign of Pisces forms a sextile to Uranus in the zodiac sign of Taurus for the last time on January 20th. Now, Saturn and Uranus are two planets that are naturally antagonistic towards one another in astrology. They also happen to be the two ruling planets of the zodiac sign of Aquarius. Now, you might ask, why are Saturn and Uranus so antagonistic? Maybe it had a little something to do with Saturn overthrowing his father and castrating him in the process. You can imagine why Uranus, whenever it gets around Saturn, might get a little bit uneasy. In any case, they're also antagonistic for another reason. Saturn is a planet that's very much invested in the past. Saturn believes that the best things in life have already happened, usually centuries ago, and that the future is all downhill from now. While Uranus believes that the best is yet to come, and that once we can free ourselves of the past, then we can go and realize our potential in a completely unscripted future. Saturn believes in reinstating what was lost, while Uranus believes in inventing something new. Now, these two planets put aside their differences when they form a sextile. Sextile is a benevolent aspect between the planets where they change their disposition, no matter how antagonistic or no matter how much they do not get along. When planets are in sextile, that means they are combining two signs that are joined to one another by gender, i.e. the male signs or the female signs, or what we call nowadays the yin signs and the yang signs. Those signs that are connected to one another in that way, the disposition of the aspect becomes more helpful. It becomes more supportive. Now, when Saturn forms a sextile to Uranus, a planet that tends to be very utopian in its outlook, Saturn by sextile reminds Uranus that utopias tend to focus on aspiration while ignoring the consequences. While Uranus shows Saturn that there isn't a past that doesn't dream of a future as being a better place. And without that dream of a future being a better place, then Adam and Eve would have just thrown in the fig leaf centuries ago when they were exiled from Eden. The future, according to Uranus, is the only thing that can redeem everything that has come before. But Uranus can't build that future without Saturn's help. On January 26th, Neptune re-enters the zodiac sign of Aries, where it will remain until March 2039. Neptune glamorizes whatever zodiac sign it happens to be passing through, and we've certainly seen a lot of glamorization of this Mars-ruled sign since March of last year. Ruled by Mars, the planet of men, Neptune glamorizes ideas of war, anger, and brute force, along with toughness and never giving in. So you may have noticed this in the lives of the people around you or on television or in our general culture, this emphasis on being tough, this emphasis on might makes right, that it's better to be strong and wrong than it is to be right and weak. And this is all Neptunian in its flavor, because Neptune really affects the culture that we live in, affects the things that we find very trendy or very fashionable. So it may be very fashionable right now to be very brusque, to perhaps be rude, and to swear a lot. And this shows off a kind of manliness or a forceful type of personality. But Neptune is the planet of illusion and disillusionment. And what I want you to think of when I talk about that idea is a wave breaking on the shore and then receding back into itself. The wave breaks on the shore and it spreads out in all directions, and that can be what's illusory, that can be the zeitgeist, that can be the themes that are prevalent in our culture right now. But then that wave will recede back into itself. It recedes or pulls back into the ocean, and that's the feeling of the disillusionment. So there's a lot going on with Neptune. There's this feeling like, maybe I have to be this way, or it's trendy to be this way, or I have to show off my strength and never show weakness. But at the same time, there's also this feeling of maybe I am weak underneath and I have to compensate for that in some sort of way. Maybe I am kind of wandering or meandering in my life right now, but I can't let anyone see that. Everyone has to see that I'm very surefire and I know what I think and speak what I feel. Neptune will be asking a question that will take about 13 years to ponder, which is, what is real power? Is it about putting down people, or is it about lifting them up? This is something that will be an underlining theme to your life for the next 13 years. On February 3rd, Uranus comes out of retrograde. Uranus retrograde doesn't exactly put your life on pause, but it does slow down developments significantly. And since it reversed direction last September, you've enjoyed a bit of a holiday. No bolts out of the blue, unexpected reversals, or rude awakenings. Now, this isn't to say that you've been absolutely immune from Uranus's effects. Uranus is still the planet of revolution and change. However, its backwards motion allowed for a heads up beforehand, so that many of the things that would have taken you by surprise didn't. You could see the about face coming from miles away, and you probably had plenty of time to prepare for it. Needless to say, all of this changes when Uranus comes out of retrograde. This is when life goes back into fast motion, and things that were on the back burner will be front and center again, which is good news for those of you who've been waiting on stalled plans. Not such good news if you've grown complacent or adopted the ostrich policy about certain unappealing situations. On February 13th, Saturn re-enters the zodiac sign of Aries, where it will remain until April 12th, 2028. Now, Saturn does two things at once when it's traveling through the zodiac sign of Aries. First of all, it demands that you obey authority, but it also makes you question the authority that you are following. Like, does this person deserve to be in a position of power over me? If they do, then everything's good. Nothing makes you feel more secure than to follow someone who knows what they're doing, who shows resolve, and isn't afraid to do what's right even if other people think it's wrong. But what if this person isn't the leader that they pretend to be? What if they're really a secret bully? Blame other people for something that's their fault, or fail to deliver on their promises? Then you will work to overthrow that person because they shouldn't be where they are. They aren't worthy. Saturn in Aries takes authority very seriously, but at the same time, Saturn in Aries is reluctant to step into a position where it has authority over others. This is something that you'll be struggling with over the next 2 years. On February 17th, there will be a solar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. This solar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Aquarius kicks off a 2-year eclipse cycle that will be taking place in the zodiac signs of Aquarius and Leo, which means that the months of February and August are going to be pivotal months for the next 2 years. Now, what happens when we have a solar eclipse, particularly when we have a solar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Aquarius? A solar eclipse is the period of time in which the moon moves in front of the sun and blocks its light. Now, not all solar eclipses are visible from where we are, although here in North America, we've seen a number of them in recent years. But even if the moon doesn't actually move in front of the sun, that's still the idea of what's happening as far as your astrological chart is concerned. So a solar eclipse is often connected to a radical shift or change in your life direction. So this radical shift in life direction is going to be taking place in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is a pretty complex sign. It's often associated with modern technology, with utopian visions of the future, with the idea nowadays of AI taking over and the triumph of science, all these sorts of things. It's also regarded as being a very humanitarian sign or a very people-oriented sign. And that is indeed very true. Aquarius is the last of the 3 air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, and the air signs always deal with relationships and how well you get along with other people. Aquarius really has to do with the individual in the group. The word collective gets bandied around a lot with Aquarius, but I think there's a little bit more going on with Aquarius than that. Aquarius is very much group-oriented because it believes that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So in other words, Aquarius wants to do right by the most people that it can do right by, and not just for a select or a privileged few. Now, Aquarius, as I said, is very group-oriented, so it's going to be very community-oriented or very cause-oriented. But at the same time, because of its rulership of Saturn and Uranus, there's always a part of Aquarius that doesn't feel like it really fits in, like it's really part of that group. I often joke with Aquarian clients that you were born under the sign that even if you came up with the idea of a book club and you got your friends together and you came up with the list of the first 7 books that everyone was going to read, and they all said, that's great, let's read those books, you would feel in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks that you didn't belong, that you weren't a part of this group, that you just didn't feel like you clicked with everyone. So Aquarius has this very curious click with people, but an out of sync feeling with people that goes along inside the gist or the gestalt, so to speak, of the zodiac sign. So when you have a solar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Aquarius, which is a people-oriented sign, you may suddenly feel like you're out of sync with the people that you have relied on or talked to or been besties with in your everyday life. Like you don't belong anymore. Something has happened. Something has changed. Maybe beliefs have taken you away from a certain religious practice. Maybe your politics have shifted or changed. Maybe there are things that are going on in your neighborhood or your community or at work that have really pricked your conscience and you can't abide by these rules or laws anymore. It doesn't have to be radical, but it could have a radicalizing effect because of the Uranian component that's involved in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. So it can be this sudden sense that you feel like a stranger to the people in your life. And the people in your life may not notice, or the people in your life might even reach out and say, hey, what's up? And you might feel like you don't really want to talk about it, or they don't really get it. Or even if you were to share what's really going on, probably within about 5 minutes of the conversation, they'd start talking about themselves again. And you would be like, well, what was the point of even trying to share? So this feeling of being out of step, of suddenly being on the outside looking in, is something that's going to really permeate your life around February 17th. Now, there are some people who are going to find this liberating. They're going to be like, yay, I don't have to put up with those squares at work. I'm going to be myself, finally. And then there are some people who are going to find it very isolating. Like, I used to get along with Aunt Bee and her friends, and now suddenly I feel like I don't really have anything to say to them. And this is a very isolating feeling. So everyone's going to have their own personal reaction to this sudden out of syncness, this sudden, like, not really clicking with the people that you used to click with. And of course, your reaction will all depend on what zodiac sign you were born under. On February 22nd, Venus forms a trine to Jupiter. This Venus-Jupiter trine is fantastic. It's so rare and wonderful that you're really going to want to make the best of it that you can. Now, it's always a wonderful time when the two benefics in the sky, Venus and Jupiter, form a trine to one another. A trine between planets is like a bridge between zodiac signs. That means that there is an aspect or a relationship that's taking place between two or more signs of like element. In this case, Venus is in the zodiac sign of Pisces, and Jupiter is in the zodiac sign of Cancer. So you really can't get more simpatico than that. But what makes this trine even better is that Venus is exalted in the zodiac sign of Pisces, and Jupiter is exalted in the zodiac sign of Cancer. So it's basically exaltations abound. But what does that mean? Well, Venus is about getting together with someone that you're in love with, and Jupiter is about bringing people together under one roof. So Venus-Jupiter trines are not only incredibly romantic and wonderful, and that makes February 22nd really, really special, but it's also good for getting people together around an idea or around a cause, or getting them signed up for something. That can span the gamut from signing people up for a cause that you believe in to fundraising, where people just sort of open up their iPhones and ask if they can Venmo you the amount of money that you're asking for, and might even double it. So these are the things that you can pretty much expect to happen with Venus in Pisces forming a trine to Jupiter in Cancer on this day. So what's going to be really wonderful is getting together with people, reuniting with people that you haven't seen in a long time, but also mergers and acquisitions will be particularly blessed during this period of time. So if there was ever a time to tell someone what you really felt about them, in a good way, to get closer to someone that you felt distant from, or for asking for money for a good cause, then the Venus-Jupiter trine on February 22nd is absolutely that day. On March 3rd, there will be a lunar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Virgo. Lunar eclipses are a bit different from solar eclipses. Solar eclipses will often signal a radical change in life direction, whereas a lunar eclipse asks you to look back over your last 6 months and to ask yourself if you really like the path that you are on. Are you getting something out of it? Or is it something that you're making yourself traverse? All right. Now, that doesn't mean that the path that you're on is a particularly easy path or that you're having a lot of fun trudging along. But what it does mean is that you need to really reflect and see if it's really doing something for you or not. Because sometimes we can stick to things because we believe we have to stick to something. Maybe it's a responsibility. Maybe it's a thankless task. Maybe it's because we don't feel like we have any other option. And it's during that period of time that a lunar eclipse will signify the bottom dropping out from underneath a situation that you really don't feel contains you anymore. And when we're dealing with that sort of an idea, the bottom dropping out from underneath a situation that you don't feel contains or holds you anymore, then we're dealing with the theme of Virgo. So we ask ourselves, what does Virgo rule over? Well, we know that Virgo is the zodiac sign of work, health, and service. So these are the three things that are very important to people born under Virgo or who have Virgo rising. And these are things that are probably going to be very pertinent to you in your life right now. Like, do you feel like the work that you're doing is meaningful? Or does it feel tedious? Do you feel like you're being of service to someone? Or do you feel like you're being exploited? And what's going on with your body, with your health? This is something that you also want to pay attention to during this period of time. Or if something doesn't feel right in your body, you're not feeling comfortable, you're not feeling the same vim and vigor, or maybe there's a cold that you're having a hard time shaking, then this is the time to go ahead and check in with a health professional to see what's up. Because if something is up, then the likelihood is that this is something that you can nip in the bud before it becomes something more prolonged or complicated. But I also want to talk to you about Virgo's relationship to the body in a different way. We all know that the body is ruled by a planet, that's the moon, but there's a zodiac sign that's very much connected to the body, and that's Virgo. Many people will say Cancer, but also it's Virgo and maybe even a little bit more Virgo. Now, some of that comes from people making fun of Virgos, like overly fussy about their physical surroundings, and maybe they're hypochondriacs or they always have allergies to food or cats or dogs or people or something along those lines. But what's really going on is that the body is picking up on things, okay? If you've got Virgo sun, Virgo rising, Virgo moon, then your body is like your antenna. It picks up on things. And it kind of works the way that insects work in our environment. For instance, there have been articles in the past few years of drops in the insect population, and this being signs of things going on with the planet Earth itself. That's kind of like how the body operates, that it may be responding to things that you are ignoring or are neglecting, or you might be saying are all right. And again, during this period of time when there's a lunar eclipse in Virgo, you want to pay attention to these signs. You want to pay attention to these ailments or this drop in energy, or maybe you're getting weird rashes or something along those lines. This is your body trying to wake you up to something that you're not comfortable with, something that you don't like, and that would include eating habits and sleeping habits. Virgo is the zodiac sign that's very much connected to the body, but it's ruled by Mercury, the planet of the mind. And so there can sort of be a little bit of a mind over matter thing that takes place with a Virgo, where you explain away things or say it's no big deal, or, I'm just kind of like making it up, or maybe it's all in my head, something along those lines. But during this time, if it's coming out in your body, if you're having skin irritations or loss of appetite, something along those lines, this is a sign that your body is resisting a situation that you may be trying to force yourself to accommodate, or that you may be trying to sell yourself on in some sort of way. And so your body is resisting this, and it's trying to give a wake-up call to your mind, which has probably talked itself out of believing that anything's wrong. And so if your body is registering this, then pay attention to it, because it's showing that something is wrong, that your soul or your psyche is not good with what's happening, and that something needs to be done. On March 10th, Jupiter, planet of belief, comes out of retrograde in Cancer, the zodiac sign of its exaltation. This is when you discover if your faith was well placed or not. Jupiter in Cancer is all about being the hearth and home that other people seek. You provide the roof over their head and the bed to call their own. You cradle and comfort when they feel hurt or afraid, and you make them feel like they're loved when they feel unloved. But for the past 4 months that Jupiter's been retrograde, Jupiter turned retrograde on November 11th, you haven't felt very reassuring or confident, like a parent who's been unable to help their child in their time of need. You lost faith in yourself and your abilities. You might have asked, what kind of person am I when I can't provide? Or why can't I take away somebody else's pain? Yet, you stayed. And that's what Jupiter retrograde is all about. It keeps on believing when there's nothing to support that belief, because it knows that at the end of the day, it's not about having the answers or making the bad things go away. It's about holding someone's hand in the dark and waiting with them for the light to emerge again, which it will, now that Jupiter has resumed direction. On April 13th, Mars will form a conjunction to Neptune. This is a peculiar conjunction. It's peculiar because Mars is a planet that's very upfront. If Mars sees something that it wants, it rushes right after it in order to get it, to grab it, to take it, to make it its own. And Mars is very powerful right now because it's in its own zodiac sign, the zodiac sign of Aries. But Neptune is also in the zodiac sign of Aries. Remember what I was saying earlier, that Neptune tends to glamorize the zodiac sign that it's passing through? It takes the traits of that sign and it makes them almost mythological in their resonance and in their appeal. So when you have a Mars-Neptune conjunction, you can have this real belief that you're on this worthwhile crusade, that you're on this worthwhile adventure or campaign, and that you're heading in the right direction and other people need to be heading in the same direction that you're heading in as well. So when you're feeling that virility, when you're feeling that anger, when you're feeling that athleticism, things that are connected to Aries, maybe even militants, when you're feeling that, you're feeling very, very good. But at the same time, we're not talking about a Mars-Jupiter conjunction, okay? And we're not even talking about maybe a Mars-Pluto conjunction. Both of those planets would definitely feed the fire of Mars. It would make Mars feel more Marsy, more on top of things and having direction and purpose and targeting what it wants and going after it and accomplishing its goals. With Neptune, however, what happens is that there's a slightly kind of intoxicated feeling. Part of it is that whenever you get around a vision of the way that things can be, well, Neptune ruled over visions and also hallucinations, okay, and altered states, sometimes altered states brought about by drug use or alcohol. So there's a kind of intoxicating feeling with Neptune. It's kind of Mars under the influence of Neptune. So if Neptune is saying, yes, you're very virile and strong and purpose-oriented, Mars is like, yeah, I'm virile, strong, purpose-oriented. I can beat anybody. I can dominate anything. But at the same time, there's always this feeling of shifting sands underneath. Like what I was saying, it's not a Mars-Jupiter conjunction or a Mars-Pluto conjunction where you feel really steady on your feet and like you're being fueled for this purpose. It's more kind of like, I believe in this and I want to believe in this, and this is a vision that I have and I keep reaching out for it. But like a phantom, my hands are passing through this vision like it's a ghost, like it's intangible, like it's not really there. So what can happen with something like this, because Mars in Aries doesn't want to show any kind of weakness, it doesn't want to show that it's wavering, it doesn't want to show that it's bewildered or confused, okay, it's going to double down. It's going to double down on its assertiveness. It's going to double down on might makes right. It's going to double down on what it feels it should be doing. And so if there are natural questions or if there are natural doubts or natural anxieties, there can be an overcompensation that takes place here with the Neptune energy. It's like, well, I'm not confused. I'm not intoxicated. I'm not under the influence. I'm on top of everything and I'm tough. And see that bed of nails? I'm going to go and sleep on it tonight. So Mars is kind of proving itself, but it's trying to run up a hill that's muddy and very slippery, and it's not getting very far, and it's slipping on itself. So this can be a time in which you might feel, well, this could be a time, if everything's going well, where you're feeling that you're connecting to a higher purpose and that something's calling to you and you're going to answer that call, kind of like Joan of Arc talking to the angel. Okay, that can be a Mars and Aries conjunct Neptune moment, that might leave your farming neighbors wondering who you're talking to and where you're going. But, that could be something. But at the same time, it could also be like, I have to keep believing in this because I said I believed in this, or I have to come through with this because I said I would come through with this. And it can be something that can cause a great deal of stress and a great deal of strain, especially if you're trying to force yourself to be someone that you're not, or if you're trying to force yourself to go through with something that you really don't believe is the right thing to do. So this Mars and Neptune conjunctions can sort of bring a glorification of a cause or a crusade, but it can also bring a lot of heavy doubts and a lot of anxieties about your ability. And then it begs the question, well, how's that going to work out? What are you going to do with that? And that leads us to the next major Mars planetary aspect, which takes place on April 19th, which is the Mercury-Mars-Saturn conjunction in the zodiac sign of Aries. So if Mars is under the influence of Neptune, and remember, Neptune's in Aries, so Mars rules it. So it can be under the influence. Neptune is being a supportive figure here towards Mars' belief in what a strong, powerful person should be. You can sort of see the theme of head going on here. I mean, Mercury rules the mind. Aries is the zodiac sign of the head. Saturn is the planet that's going to introduce questions and doubts and, do you really think this is the best idea? And then you've got Mars. So again, Mars is ruling, maybe even overruling the Mercury and the Saturn. But Mercury and Saturn, because they're in conjunction, are trying to put the brakes on the Mars energy, or they're trying to provide a reality check or bring up certain questions. They want Mars to sort of think this through. And Mars being Mars is maybe out shouting them or overruling them or saying, this is the way it's going to be. And if you're not on board, get out. I want winners, not whiners, sort of thing. So it's not a square where the conflict is explicit, where, for instance, Mercury or Saturn would really be arguing with the Mars energy to talk it out of what they might think is not the best idea. It's more kind of like the conscience is being pricked with the Mercury and Saturn there. But if they're being outshouted or overruled, then they're definitely going to take the back seat. They're going to be like, okay, you do what you want to do. The reason for that is because Mars is in its own zodiac sign. Mars is dominant. So what that means is if you're the person dealing with this type of Mars personality, and you see that the person's going through all this struggle and difficulty, you might try being there for this person right now, but because of the conjunction, you're probably not going to be heard. So it may not be the best time for you to expect the person to listen to you and to work together with this person towards a solution or an answer. You may just have to let the person be enraged and struggling with themselves and wrestling with the angel and sit back and wait for them to come to their senses. And then if you're the Mars energy in this and you find that friends aren't trying to talk you out of things or that people aren't there for you in the way that they were before, instead of saying, oh, I'll do this on my own, you might want to sort of read the room in that people might not really be on board with what you're about, with what you're doing, but they're not going to counteract you either because you're the more dominant force. You're the louder voice here. So this is a time in which you're going to be feeling very much like you're in a fight for something, in a struggle for something. But if you don't feel like people are supporting or encouraging you, you might want to pick up on that signal. They might be seeing something that you don't see much more clearly. And when you don't feel so much stress or wrapped around something, it would be a good time to check in. But this lineup of planets is probably going to be very wrapped up in itself, very much about proving itself, and might not be the most attentive to what other people have to say, particularly if it's any kind of disagreement. On April the 25th, Uranus re-enters the zodiac sign of Gemini, where it will remain until August 2032. When Uranus first entered Gemini on July 7th, 2025, it knocked over the game board and sent all the pieces flying. But then it retrograded back down into the zodiac sign of Taurus on November 7th, which gave it some time to cool its heels. Uranus is kind of like a genie that's been let out of the bottle. At first, it's exhilarating to see what the genie can do. But once you register the fact that wishes come with consequences, you may have reconsidered the things that you had set in motion. Now, nobody's saying that you have to unwish what you have wished. That's impossible, but there is such a thing as being wiser as a result of your experiences and making better choices. Make a point of serving the interests of both you and the people around you, and you will find yourself driving that chariot rather than being run over by it. On May 4th, Mars forms a square to Jupiter. In this particular square, we have Mars in Aries in one corner and Jupiter in Cancer in the other. Both are very powerful and both are very strong. Mars is strong because it's in domicile. It means that it's at home in the zodiac sign that it rules. But Jupiter is exalted in the zodiac sign of Cancer. That means Jupiter is at its most powerful and its most prominent. What we're also dealing with here are two cardinal signs. Cardinal signs are zodiac signs that are connected to either an equinox or a solstice. Aries is the zodiac sign of the spring equinox, and Cancer is the zodiac sign of the summer solstice. When you're dealing with cardinal signs, particularly in a square, neither is going to back down to the other. Neither one is going to yield the field. In fact, both of them are going to go on the attack, but they're going to go on the attack in two very different ways. Mars in Aries will go on the attack by butting heads. It's going to charge right at its opponent. Well, Jupiter in Cancer is going to sidestep and evade. It's going to blend into the background. It's going to keep the Mars in Aries guessing. It's going to be very hard to pin down. And that's because Cancers rarely take on anything directly. Cancers approach the things that they want circuitously. Or if a Cancer is in conflict, they will blend into the background and bide their time until you lower your guard, and then you get the gotcha pinch from the crab. So both signs know how to fight, and both signs know how to struggle. And a square is, at the end of the day, a fight. It's a struggle. It's where the two signs are engaged in trying to beat out the other zodiac sign. What we can also sort of think about when we think of this Mars in Aries squaring Jupiter in Cancer is kind of like two parents who are fighting. On one hand, you've got the Mars in Aries parent who's saying, don't spoil the child. They need to be tough. Don't make it easy for them. The world isn't a nice place. They have to be able to go on out there and muscle their way through things. And instead of coddling or comforting the kid, you want that kid to know that the world can't be trusted. So you want that kid to be tough. Stop coddling them and make them do more push-ups. Okay, that's a Mars in Aries solution. Toughen up and make yourself at the ready as you go after what you want. And then the Jupiter in Cancer is going to be more along the lines of being nurturing, nourishing, and supportive. It's going to be like, yeah, the world's a really rough and difficult place, and there's no reason why our home has to reflect that. Our home should be a loving, nurturing, and nourishing place. It should be where we take care of the child, where we take care of one another. These are good virtues. This isn't a sign of weakness to care about someone. This isn't a sign of weakness to be protecting or to be nurturing, to provide. So the Jupiter in Cancer is kind of sort of playing the home field. It's playing the home turf. And it believes in standing its ground, if this is their native land, if this is their hearth, if this is their home. So where Mars in Aries might be a sort of intruding army, the Jupiter Cancer is going to fight extra hard because it's the homeland. It's what they believe in, but they're not going to be obvious about it. They're not going to charge ahead. They're going to sort of blend in the background and stalk and hunt. Remember, Cancer is ruled by the moon, named after the goddess Diana, goddess of the hunt, and it knows how to blend in and how to sneak its way towards where it wants to be. So this is kind of going to be the conflict that's going on. You may be following one impulse, which is, I need to take as much ground as I can, or another impulse, which is, I need to sort of blend into the background and make my way towards my objective and really judge whether this is something that I want or not. But it's also going to be these two fighting impulses. One is going to be, I want to be aggressive and take this on. And the other one is, I want to be caring and I want to be supportive and I want to be nurturing. And they're both very powerful. They're both very strong. They're pretty equally matched. But Jupiter is the larger planet, in our solar system. Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system. It's bigger than Mars. And where Mars is at home in Aries, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So in the end, it's Jupiter's game. It's Jupiter's win. Jupiter is stronger because it's exalted. But be forewarned that just because Jupiter is exalted in this particular planetary square, that won't stop Mars from trying to gain the upper hand and the win in the end. On May 6th, Pluto turns retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. When Pluto's retrograde, you can't help being swept back into a situation that you thought you had put behind you. Pluto was named after the Roman god of the underworld, so that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about an area of your life that feels most like an enormous, gaping black hole, something that feeds off your energy, something that's bigger than you, and something that looks like it's fathomless. So, what do you do when you're facing something like this? Well, what you do is that you accept what you cannot change. Because with Pluto, the more you struggle, the deeper you sink. But that doesn't mean you have to be passive about this whole thing or accept your fate. With Pluto retrograde, if you let things play out the way that they're going to play out anyway, then you will eventually emerge on the other side of its retrograde, revitalized and empowered, probably in October. Why? Well, the reason why is because Pluto always rewards those who brave its trials. On May 22nd, the Sun forms a conjunction to Uranus in the zodiac sign of Gemini. Believe it or not, this is the first time since Uranus entered the zodiac sign of Gemini that it's actually forming a conjunction to the Sun. All the other times it's been forming trines or squares or whatever, but this is the first time that these two planets actually come together in the zodiac sign of Gemini. So what can we expect? We can expect either something that's shocking or illuminating. Now, there's always the possibility that it can be both shocking and illuminating, and so we won't go ahead and rule that out. So what are we talking here about when we talk about a Sun-Uranus conjunction? Essentially, what we're talking about here is an epiphany. An epiphany is when the clouds suddenly part in the heavens and this ray of light comes through and you hear this heavenly chorus go, ah, and you suddenly see things as they really, really are. And you're dazed, you're moved by this revelation. You can see everything that you've been struggling with and what the solution is and what you need to do and how to go about things. And then all of a sudden the clouds come back together again and that revelation disappears and you're left trying to figure out what the hell you were just looking at. Okay, these sorts of epiphanies or revelations that show up for a split instant are the stuff of Sun-Uranus conjunctions. And they can be really wild and crazy. I mean, kind of like St. Paul on the road of Damascus crazy, I mean, St. Paul is heading on the road of Damascus and he's out there to persecute the Christians. And suddenly he gets struck by a bolt out of the blue where he has this revelation and he hears, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he changes his name and he changes his direction and he changes his entire life. He suddenly is pro-Christian and becomes one of the most major writers in the Christian tradition, someone who's extraordinarily influential and powerful, even to this day. So that's kind of what you can expect with the Sun-Uranus conjunction. Now, okay, you're not going to be on the road of Damascus and all of a sudden this great voice is going to say, why are you persecuting me? Or you're heading in the wrong direction. What it is that you're suddenly going to have this aha moment, this moment where the light bulb goes off over your head and you'll be like, that's what that person meant. Or that's what I've been working for. That's exactly the name that I've been looking for. And what you want to do is write it down really fast, like grab your phone and mutter it into a voice recording because it's going to disappear just as quickly as it showed up. But Sun-Uranus conjunctions can be wonderful. They can be this sudden jolt of energy, this sudden realization that you have. Now, it may leave the people around you scratching their heads in bewilderment, like, how can you be so sure? And why do you think you know the thing that you suddenly know? Or how can you suddenly be adopting this position when you were so dead set against it? Well, those things don't have to be explained, nor should they. They're just things that come along with epiphanies, when suddenly the clouds part and you can see things for the way that they are. But just because you can see something for the way that it is, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to articulate it or to explain it or to describe it. And that's something that lies before you on the road ahead. Not only trying to wrap your mind around what it is that you just realized, but trying to incorporate that into the rest of your life. On June 9th, Venus will form a conjunction to Jupiter. Remember how I was talking about how earlier in the year that there was a trine between Venus and Jupiter? At that time, Venus was in the zodiac sign of Pisces, and Jupiter was in the zodiac sign of Cancer, where it still is right now. But Venus then was exalted in Pisces, and Jupiter then was exalted in Cancer. Well, Jupiter's still exalted in Cancer, but now Venus has come to join Jupiter in the zodiac sign of Cancer. So they've moved from a trine, which is, I'm approaching you, to a conjunction, which is, I have arrived. Okay, so it's kind of like, the Queen of Sheba enters under the Venus-Jupiter trine earlier this year. She comes in with the perfumes of Arabia, and everyone's celebrating her. But then with the conjunction is when she leaves her chariot and her admirers and her slaves and soldiers, and she sits down with Solomon to have a one-on-one chat about how things are going to be from now on. So that's pretty much a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. The planets are together under one zodiac sign. So this is a fulfilling conjunction. This is someone was approaching and now they're at the door and you're letting them in. So let's say you were dating someone back during that Venus-Jupiter trine. Well, this is where you commit to one another. Or let's say you reunited with someone during that period of time. This conjunction is when you realize that you really want to be a part of one another's life in whatever context or way that can be, and that you're going to be a part of one another's life. There's a pact, there's an agreement, I'm welcoming you into my life and you're going to be a part of it. And the other person's like, what a wonderful thing. So this is what happens with conjunctions. Also, if there was talk of a merger or an acquisition during that Venus-Jupiter trine, this is the time when you seal the deal. This is when you sign the papers. This is when you make that full commitment. So this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is really about fulfillment. Like I said, I was going to do this and you said that you were going to be here and now we're both here and we're going to sit down and we're going to make this commitment. We're going to fulfill this vow and we're going to look towards the future as a partnership, as being part of one another's lives. So these two benefics coming together in the zodiac sign of Cancer is really wonderful. It's really terrific. And it's really about locking things into place. It's about fortifying your position, that we're in it together and I'm here for you and you're here for me. So this conjunction is something that you absolutely want to celebrate. And also moving forward, this conjunction gives you the pledge or the promise that you know that you can rely on in the weeks, months, and years ahead. On June 30th, Jupiter enters the zodiac sign of Leo. A new chapter begins when Jupiter, planet of good fortune and higher purpose, enters the zodiac sign of Leo. Leo is ruled by the sun, the source of heat and light. And for the next year, solar energy will kindle your sense of higher purpose so that you become the shaping force in your own life. It's not up to fate or circumstances to determine what you make of yourself. It's up to you. Indeed, you will feel a moral responsibility to realize your inner potential, whether it's a talent, gift, or calling. This is a galvanizing and fulfilling time for you, as long as you don't settle for second best, or allow yourself to be pigeonholed by other people's expectations. Jupiter will be in the zodiac sign of Leo until July 26th, 2027. On July 20th, Jupiter will form a trine to Neptune while opposing Pluto, and then on July 21st, Jupiter will sextile Uranus. Now that's a lot that's going on in the sky there, with Jupiter forming a trine to Neptune, opposing Pluto, and then sextiling Uranus. And Jupiter has just entered the zodiac sign of Leo, which is a fire sign, which is why I thought I would share with you a story, a personal favorite myth of mine, to illustrate what I think these planetary aspects are talking about. And this is the story of Prometheus. Now, remember earlier in our episode when I was talking about how Uranus and Saturn didn't have the best relationship? And that's because Saturn overthrew Uranus by castrating him. And that's how Saturn became the king of heaven. Well, no sooner did Saturn become the king of heaven than it was prophesied that Saturn himself would be overthrown by one of his children. And so in order to stave off this prophecy, in order to make sure that this future didn't come to pass, Saturn insisted that with the birth of each one of his children, his wife Rhea would take the child and give it to him, and Saturn would immediately swallow the child, and the child would go down his throat and land down in his belly and languish there for all of time. This is indeed what Saturn did with his children as they were born. Saturn swallowed each and every one of them, and the one he didn't swallow was Jupiter. That's because Rhea sort of caught on and wrapped Jupiter up in swaddling clothes and had him taken to an island somewhere off of Crete, and turned around and dressed a boulder in baby clothes and fed it to Saturn, who ate it. And so he thought that he had swallowed or eaten Jupiter, that he had consumed all of his children and held off the curse. Well, Jupiter comes of age, and there's a big war that's fought between Saturn and Jupiter as to who's going to rule heaven. Saturn led the Titans, who were the people who predated the Olympians. The Olympians is Jupiter's court, so that's going to be Hera and Vesta, Ceres, Pluto, and Neptune, his siblings whom he had freed and led in battle. And they had this terrific battle in the heavens where they were pretty much evenly matched, except for when Prometheus, who was a Titan, decided to switch sides. Prometheus had been fighting on the side of Saturn, his brother, and then he all of a sudden had foresight. He had a vision, an intuitive flash that actually it was Zeus who was going to be the winner of this battle, and that he would indeed succeed in overthrowing his father. And so Prometheus went and joined Jupiter's side of the battle, and actually ended up being one of the decisive figures in this battle, where Saturn is overthrown, just like the prophecy had predicted, and Jupiter sets up his rulership of heaven from his throne world of Olympus, which is on top of Mount Olympus. And so Prometheus is technically Jupiter's uncle, and Prometheus was famously known as a trickster thief. In many ways, Prometheus is the predecessor of Hermes or Mercury. He was not to be trusted. No one ever really knew what side Prometheus was going to be on, particularly when he switched sides in the middle of the battle from Saturn to his nephew, Jupiter. But Prometheus was also a very creative and a very useful Titan. It's Prometheus that Jupiter charges with creating the human race. And so Prometheus creates humans out of clay and breathes life into them. And Jupiter's delighted with this because now he's got a whole bunch of slaves that he can rule over. And Jupiter's relationship to mortals at that time was basically like they were cattle. They were infinitely disposable, like they were less than nothing. But he needed someone to sacrifice to him and the other gods. And why not mortals? And they didn't really live for that long, and you didn't really develop much of an attachment to them, and that this sounded like a good thing. And so as long as the mortals sacrificed to Zeus and his fellow Olympians, everything was good in heaven. But there came a day when Prometheus looked at the human beings, and he felt like they were being exploited, like they were being used, like they were being treated like less than nothing, not even given the dignity of property. And he didn't like the way that Zeus was treating them. And he saw in humanity the potential of something great, the potential of something better. He saw a dignity, he saw a character, he saw through his foresight. And that's what Prometheus means. It means to see forward into life or future. He saw through his foresight that humans would create great civilizations, that they would be more than just serving and sacrificing to the gods, that they were a species unto themselves, which was definitely worth encouraging and supporting because of their future greater glory. But what made the humans different from the gods? Well, obviously mortality, and Prometheus couldn't do anything about that. But they were also at a technological disadvantage. The gods had everything that they wanted, and nature bent to their will because basically the gods represented forces of nature. So, there wasn't really a problem there. But what Prometheus realized that humans needed in order to be on the same playing field as the god, to be on the same level as the gods themselves, was fire. Humans needed fire. This is the thing that would transform them culturally and technologically. So what Prometheus does is that he goes and he steals fire. He takes, I think it's like a burning coal or an ember or something like that, from Hephaestus, the craftsman god, the one who built things out of his kiln, like great spears and chariots and weapons and things like this. Prometheus goes and he steals a coal out of Hephaestus's workshop, and he puts it in a fennel stalk, which at first I was kind of like, a fennel stalk? Isn't that like that fennel? Is that thing that you eat on your plate? But evidently fennels can grow as tall as 6 feet. Okay, so they're not like the little things that you have like on your plate at a restaurant. So Prometheus splits the fennel and he puts the coal down into the pith, which is sticky part inside of the stalk, which actually can hold a coal. It can hold fire. It was a form of transporting fire. And he takes this down to humanity and he gives humanity fire. He teaches humans how to work with it. He teaches humans how to cook, how to smelt metal, how to shape things with fire, burn things with fire, destroy things with fire. And as you can imagine, fire dramatically transforms the lives of the humans on Earth. And so Zeus is infuriated when he finds out that the humans have fire. As a quick note here, it's interesting how both Prometheus and Saturn are two gods who are overthrown by Zeus. Prometheus will eventually be punished by Zeus for his transgression. But what's interesting is that these are two gods that were very much invested in the betterment of humankind. Prometheus gives fire to mankind and transforms them from basically worse than cattle to a civilization. But Saturn, after he's overthrown by Zeus, teaches mankind how to farm, how to work the earth and to bring about life. So it's interesting how it's the two rebellious gods or the outsider gods or the gods who are exiled and cast out who are the ones who truly benefit humanity, or at least according to Greek mythology. So Zeus finds out that Prometheus has done this, and he's furious. Prometheus had always been a trickster, a jokester, the uncle at the holiday get-togethers who kind of rib the parents and kind of side with the kids. Sometimes uncles go a little too far at the holiday gatherings and they make a crack about dad or mom, which is from their youth and really gets them angry. It's kind of like that. So Prometheus, by giving mankind fire, really pisses off Zeus. He's furious. And so he punishes Prometheus by having him chained to a mountain. And every day an eagle, which is Zeus's sacred bird, comes and plunges into the side of Prometheus and pulls out his liver and eats it and then flies away again. So you can imagine the agony of that, of a bird of prey pulling your liver out and gorging itself on it and flying away. But the liver would regrow and the eagle would return the following day. And this went on and on and on for years, decades, even centuries as punishment. And what's fascinating there, of course, is that the eagle is the symbol of Zeus, of Jupiter, and the liver is the part of the body that Jupiter rules in astrology. And so Prometheus is punished like this, and then eventually he is pardoned. But what goes on here is so complex and interesting, especially when you read these planets in conjunction with it. Here we start with the planetary aspect of the Jupiter-Neptune trine. This is a very friendly trine. I mean, first of all, it's taking place in fire. Jupiter's Leo, Neptune is in Aries. But Jupiter and Neptune are brothers in mythology. Jupiter was the god of the skies and Neptune was the god of the sea. The sea reflects the sky and the sky sees itself reflected in the sea. They're bound through the water cycle. Jupiter and Neptune, they were very, very close. With Prometheus having defected to Jupiter's side and becoming kind of the reason why Jupiter wins his battle over Saturn, you've got this idea of someone changing their support. Then you have this Jupiter-Pluto opposition. And what you kind of have there with Pluto and Aquarius and Jupiter and Leo, the self versus society or the collective, if we're going to assign that value to Aquarius, we have a self expressing itself and standing up for itself against the way that things should be run or ruled. What's kind of interesting is that Jupiter asserts his right over Saturn, but then Prometheus asserts the right of humanity over Jupiter. So there's this split with authority. There's this opposition that's set up. And you could read that as Jupiter versus Prometheus. Prometheus had gone beyond the pale. He had given mankind fire and put mankind on the level of gods, or made mankind godlike, or the potential to be godlike. And so that's his great transgression. So you can sort of read that as the Jupiter-Pluto opposition. But at the same time, it's Prometheus showing Jupiter what mankind is capable of. Now, Jupiter's first response is that it is defiance, and so what he does is that he punishes Prometheus. He chains him to the side of a mountain. But what's fascinating is the evolution of Jupiter in Greek mythology, the character of Jupiter in Greek mythology. Astrology borrows its symbolism from Greek mythology, or at least that's one of the contributing factors to the way that we work with planetary interpretations. And Jupiter is seen as a planet that's good fortune and higher purpose. It's a protecting planet in an astrological chart. Just like the planet Jupiter protects the planet Earth from asteroids and meteors, it's huge. And asteroids and meteors that could smash Earth get drawn into the orbit of Jupiter, where they smash into Jupiter and are rendered into dust. Earth might very well have been devastated had Jupiter not been there in the sky. So in astrology and even in mythology, Jupiter goes on to take on this protecting, this humanitarian, this caring, this guardian placement vis-a-vis human beings. But as I pointed out in the story of Prometheus, that's not the way he starts out. He wants human beings to be slaves, even worse than slaves, and he has no care for them whatsoever. And Prometheus brings fire to them, and he punishes Prometheus, and he's probably getting ready to punish humanity. But what happens is that somehow Jupiter begins to recognize in humanity what Prometheus saw. Prometheus is foresight. So Prometheus can see the future of humanity, what it's capable of doing and what it will do. Jupiter is ruled by wisdom. He swallows the goddess of memory, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, springs from his head. So Jupiter is associated with the good judge. It's associated with wisdom. And so Jupiter changes his disposition about humanity from they're less than nothing, they're like insects, really, to hey, there's something to humanity. He sires a child, Hercules, who's part human and part god. He intermingles god energy with human energy through his various romantic escapades and trysts. So Prometheus has really kind of gotten the ball rolling with evolving Jupiter from a completely indifferent deity to one who very much cares about and patronizes humanity. And that's where I see the Jupiter-Uranus sextile taking place. But it's fascinating. There's Prometheus's foresight and there's Jupiter's wisdom, and they're not always on the same page. Prometheus, for us, is associated with technological transformation. Fire transforms humanity from like nothing to a civilization, whether it's being used as a weapon or a tool. This gift from the gods, or rather something stolen from the gods and snuck in through the fennel stalk. Okay, so it snuck on in. But what Jupiter recognized all along is the question or the issue of, was humanity ready for that? Now, clearly he begins the story with flat out, no, they're not even to be considered. But with Prometheus being associated to technology and science, Robert Oppenheimer, who creates the first atomic bomb, is called the modern day Prometheus. He took fire from the heavens and creates an atom bomb out of it, and it begins the nuclear race. Prometheus has this association with enlightenment, with science, with bettering life and civilization. But there's also wrapped up in the Promethean myth a recklessness. For a god who has foresight, he's still a trickster thief. So there's this idea of recklessness, that he recognizes the potential in mankind, but he's also kind of handing a child a gun, basically, and that's more of Zeus's or Jupiter's concern. Jupiter is more like, well, can humanity deal with this? You see it as a tool, something that transforms them, but fire can also be a weapon. Have you given them mass destruction? So for Jupiter, it's more than just like, oh, you stole from the gods. It's like, there's a reason why humanity didn't have this. It was divine. And it's because humanity couldn't perhaps handle it or manage it. But now that the cat's been let out of the bag, or the fire's been let out of the fennel stalk, and humanity has this, Jupiter has to work with the developments that come out of that. Just like Jupiter in a chart has to work with the unfolding developments of what takes place in the astrological chart itself. Jupiter is a planet that is continually evolving as it gathers different perspectives and different energies and elements to it. People will often describe Jupiter as the planet of expansion, but to me, Jupiter is really the planet of growth, and it's also an eclectic planet. It's a planet that brings in what's foreign and different, and it integrates it into the astrological chart. It benefits from different cultures, societies, points of view, beliefs. Jupiter really welcomes that. But what Jupiter has and Prometheus doesn't in this story, and what is important astrologically, is Jupiter has morality. Jupiter is a planet that's very much connected to morality, our ability to judge what's good and bad. And sometimes in our judgment of what's good or bad, we also need to judge what we are capable of doing. So when we think of Prometheus as technology and science, how it can run amok, something that's very much in debate right now with AI. Are we playing with fire with these technologies? Are we saying, oh, this is a wonderful new toy, and we don't really know what we've unleashed, which would be Promethean? And it's the two impulses. Prometheus saying, you can transform this. Okay, it's dangerous or whatever, but you can turn it into something really wonderful. But also the trickster thief. Is invention to be trusted? Are people who invent, are they doing it to better humanity, or are they doing it to fatten their pocketbook? Which can be the great questions of the day. Jupiter brings in the moral question. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it right? Is it wrong? But it's not like good, bad, right, wrong, the two angels on your shoulders. It's like, are you capable of this? If you're going to unleash atomic energy, is it going to be something that destroys the planet? Or is it going to be something that makes humanity better? And these are each of the questions whenever you come across some kind of revolution like that. And so that's kind of how I see this Jupiter going into Leo. It's bringing up these moral questions alongside this process of self-realization and self-actualization, which is very much a part of Jupiter being in the zodiac sign of Leo. But this isn't just like, oh, here's your blessing, make the best of it. It's kind of like, here's something, and what are you going to make of it? Are you going to do good, or are you going to do bad? Now, Uranus, which is often associated with Prometheus, it's not that it's doing bad. It's like, are you being reckless? Are you not in control? Are you out of your depth? Are you playing with fire? Are you playing with technology that's beyond your ability to regulate it, either legally or morally? And these are the great questions being asked by this planetary aspect. And of course, these are the great questions of the day, questions that we can ponder and get enlightenment and some sort of understanding through the story of Prometheus and Jupiter. On July 26th, Saturn turns retrograde. Delays are to be expected when Saturn, planet of time, turns retrograde. But things aren't dead in the water. Yes, you may have to wait until December 2026 to get that answer, resolution, or commitment you seek, but this is one of those few instances when time really does work in your favor, because what you propose appears to be flying in the face of an easy acceptance or rejection. You are probably going against the grain right now and challenging the way that things are typically done. Nevertheless, your prospects for success improve with each passing day. The rule of thumb with the Saturn retrograde is the longer the wait, the greater the payoff. And that's because with Saturn retrograde, delayed gratification is better than no gratification at all. On August 12th, there will be a solar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Leo. Solar eclipses, as I mentioned before in this episode, are all about radical changes of direction in your life. Solar eclipses can also in their own way be come to Jesus moments, moments in which you need to come to a realization or you need to accept terms. Maybe you were a little bit out of line, maybe you were being overly aggressive or domineering in some way, or maybe you were just on the wrong path altogether. So what does this solar eclipse in Leo mean, this period of time when the light of the sun is being blocked by the presence of the moon? What it puts me in mind of is this wonderful 19th century essay that I read years ago, and unfortunately I've forgotten where I read it, and I really forgot to print it out. But anyway, it was this essay that I read which talked about the difference between aspiration and ambition, which caught my eye and I was like, okay, that's interesting. What is the difference between aspiration and ambition? And what this essay went about to say is that aspiration is where you aspire to become something that you naturally are. You have a gift, you have a talent, you may have a calling or a tendency, a proclivity. You aspire to be the best at it. So let's say you're a painter and you're gifted. You aspire to be the best at painting. You may go on to produce a wonderful series of watercolors that your family and friends admire, or you may go on to become the new Basquiat. You're aspiring towards fulfilling what it is that you naturally have. You're fulfilling your talent. You're fulfilling your skill. You're fulfilling something that you see yourself doing and that you're also good at. So you're building on something that you already possess as a natural talent or ability. And so the aspiration is that thing that you need to go and fulfill that. And you're in service to the art, or you're in service to the skill, you're in service to the service, you're in service to whatever your talent or proclivity is. And that was seen in this essay as being a good thing. But what the essay also introduced as being the opposite of that was ambition. Now, that made me stop because I was like, well, wait, I mean, isn't it good to be ambitious? Isn't it good to be driven, to succeed, to be on top, or to be the best that you can be? But what this essay said is that more often than not, that sort of ambition can describe people who don't have the natural talent or who don't have the natural ability. Now, very quickly, this wasn't about developing that. Lots of people may not have a talent, but through skill and fortitude and their own inventiveness, they can go further than people who are talented, actually. And having that skill or that ingenuity is a talent, right? But what this essay was pointing out is that a lot of times people are ambitious for things that they don't deserve or may not even be right for them. In other words, the ambition could be inspired by jealousy or envy or a heartless sense of competition. I need to be the best at this. I need to dominate the field. So it could be like, well, if Roger can be head of a company, I can be head of a company too. And maybe I can even take Roger's place in the company, And so when you look at business or when you look at people who are involved in real competitive businesses, there's all this ambition, there's all this drive. I need to be the best selling, or I need to be the first trillionaire, or I need to, be these things. And what comes out is this rapaciousness, this hunger, maybe even a predatory feeling. And no sooner do they get what they want or have set out to accomplish, there's a dissatisfaction. It's not enough. It needs more fuel being thrown into the oven. It needs something more to strive for. It needs to dominate even more than it dominates before. And so that ambition, and it puts me in mind of the phrase blind ambition, isn't driven or motivated by doing good or being true to yourself or answering a calling or a higher purpose. It's driven by a need to acquire, maybe even a need to take away or to dominate. So when it was put in this context, well, as you can tell, I found it really interesting because it stayed with me since, and I've been sort of thinking and reflecting upon it since. So what does this have to do with the solar eclipse in Leo? Well, Leo is ruled by the sun, and Leo can have a lot to do with ourselves, with who we are as people. And the sun can have good and bad aspects to it. The sun can bring heat and light to a situation, and that's lovely. It rises on a new day, and plants respond and grow. And this is a lovely, wonderful thing. But there are also times where the sun burns because it's too dominant. It burns and things dry up. They stop growing because it's too dominant. It's too much. It's taking up too much space in the sky. It's doing a solar version of man spreading across the heavens, and that's not a good thing, And so that's where it kind of put me in mind of the solar eclipse in Leo. Are you aspiring towards being good at something that comes naturally to you, which would be a benevolent solar expression? Or are you ambitious for something you want because someone else has it and you feel like you should have that? And are you even taking your gifts and talents? Because there are many of these business people who are very talented and gifted and even brilliant, but they're not acting in a very brilliant, insightful, inspiring, or even philanthropic way. They're acting in a dreadful way, And so does ambition become this thing that you need to have, and you're forcing yourself to be that, and you're forcing other people to bend the knee to that thing that you want to be? And not even the word ego describes that, because again, what lies at the base of this is a hungry belly. It's a hungry stove. It's a fire that needs to be fed more and more and more. And so that's kind of the difference. And that's, I think, what the solar eclipse in Leo is going to really bring about. It's not so much about self-esteem or self-worth, those things that often get talked about with Leo. It's about who you are and where you see yourself going in your life. And do you feel like you're in alignment with the things that feel natural to you? Or are you being motivated by a sort of covetousness, wanting something that someone else has, and you should have that too? So these are the great questions that we ask when the lights go out in heaven. These are the great questions that we ask in the dark when the sun disappears from the sky or the moon turns blood red. These are the things that are the stuff of eclipses. And this is the sort of thing that I would invite you to think about when there's a solar eclipse in Leo on August 12th. On August 27th, there will be a lunar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Pisces. Lunar eclipses, as I mentioned before, signify times where the bottom drops out of a situation. Sometimes it's a situation that you thought was really stable and something you could rely on. And sometimes it's a situation that you discover was held together by spit and glue. So what kind of situation is the bottom going to drop out from under when there's a lunar eclipse in Pisces on August 27th? Well, the big question that I see being asked during this period of time is, how deep is your love? Now, I'm not asking that just because I loved the Saturday Night Fever album that came out in the 1970s, which I loved. I played that song all the time. But anyway, I'm asking that because it's a lunar eclipse in Pisces, which is forming a square to Uranus in the zodiac sign of Gemini. And so what happens here is that Pisces is a water sign. And so it's very much about love and caring, empathy and sympathy. And there's a very passionate side to Pisces. The way that it loves very, very deeply. And in fact, there's a lot of yearning that's involved in Pisces. Pisces can often find themselves yearning for things they can't have or for people that they can't have. And people might say, well, that's kind of self-sabotaging or self-defeating. Why would you yearn for someone that you can't have? But with Pisces, it's the yearning that is that feeling of love. So where other people would be like, well, wait, you're just going to spend your life yearning for someone or longing for someone, a Pisces would be like, well, that's the feeling that I cherish. That's something that I really enjoy. And what it comes from, again, it's not because Pisces is being self-defeating or anything like that. What it comes from is that water is the element of love in astrology, and the water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And they each relate to love in a very different fashion. But love is that emotion that stirs within you. It can produce love and rapture and ecstasy just as easily as it can produce jealousy and envy and anger and vengeance. This is the gamut of emotions that the water signs can experience. And one of those emotions is yearning for something. Now, love and relationship are ruled by two very different elements in astrology. Love, as I said, is ruled by water, and relationship is ruled by air. So the idea is that you can love someone, you could love something, and it doesn't have to be a part of your life. You could have nostalgia for something. I long for those days when we dance to How Deep Is Your Love, okay? I long for those days. I love those days. Those were so special. Well, I'm not currently dancing to How Deep Is Your Love, and I'm not like trying to like squeeze into disco pants or anything like that right now, but I can remember what that was like. That's part of my memory. That's something that I carry inside of me, and that can be reproduced, that could rematerialize because of water. Water rules memory. Water also rules fantasy. Like one can fantasize about meeting someone or loving someone. I mean, think of the millions of people who are in love with Taylor Swift. They ever going to meet Taylor Swift? No. The guy that she's marrying? Probably not. But they can still love them. They can want the best for them as a couple. And they can say, I want to meet someone just like him or just like her. Or I fantasize myself singing like Taylor Swift. That's a watery experience. That sort of love through fantasy is also a watery experience. You don't need to know Taylor Swift or anyone like that. Or let's say someone passes in your life. You break up with someone and you never really got over them, or maybe someone passes away. You can have that love. You can experience that love of just like, I had a wonderful time with that person, or my relative was such an important part of my life. And that can be manifest in the heart and in the soul through water. You don't need that person there. So yearning and longing can be like that. Like, I long to be in love. I yearn to be in love. And the longing and the yearning can be so strong that the people I meet just don't compare to it. I meet them and it's great, but they're not really what I was longing for or yearning for. So that can sometimes be a Pisces thing. When it forms a square to Uranus in Gemini, Uranus in Gemini is like the awakener. It's time to wake up. It's like Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream, who, after he corrects the lovers who've fallen in love with the wrong people and now they're all back together again, he wakes them up from the dream and they're like, oh. And so Uranus in Gemini is waking up too. And so that Uranus in Gemini might be waking up to yearning and longing, and maybe I want someone in my life, or there's this person who has always been a part of my life that I've treated as a friend, and maybe there's something more that's going on. Do you want to live your life longing for someone, or do you want someone in your life? And if you want someone in your life, what are you going to do about it? What kind of a place are you going to make? Like, what would that look like? What would that be? And with the square, it's two competing views of things. And so it can be a competing view of love versus relationship. And so that's why the question, how deep is your love, come through? Like, is your love so deep that it doesn't need another person? Or Is your love so not deep that your ties to someone can easily fall out like the bottom from underneath a bucket, which is something that often happens during a lunar eclipse? So what you're going to find out here is how deep is that love? How true is that love? But it's going to be less about the other person, and it's going to be more about you and your own very personal and private emotional life. On August 31st, Jupiter in Leo forms a trine to Saturn in Aries. This is a fascinating trine because it actually refers to a theme that's ongoing for the year of 2026, which is there are certain times of the year in which two planets that are naturally adversaries are moving into a sextile or a trine relationship with one another. Maybe they're putting aside their differences, or maybe they're finding a way to support one another. They're united maybe in some kind of mutual cause. As you might recall, Jupiter and Saturn are natural adversaries. Saturn overthrew his father Uranus and castrated him, and Saturn was in turn overthrown by his son, Jupiter. So for the two of them to be forming a trine says something that's very interesting. Jupiter, as we know in astrology, is the planet that giveth, and Saturn, as we know in astrology, is the planet that taketh away. There are two sides of the same coin. Jupiter brings things that are good, and Saturn brings things that are difficult, bad, tests, trials, and tribulations. But when they form a trine like they do in the zodiac signs of Aries and Leo, which are two zodiac signs of fire, and they're united through the element of fire, Saturn works to support or help out Jupiter in the trine. What we also have here is a departing trine. In other words, Jupiter, being the faster moving planet than Saturn, is in Leo, which is the zodiac sign that is ahead of Aries in the agricultural year. Aries is spring and Leo is summer. So Jupiter has moved ahead of Saturn in a departing trine and is receiving support from Saturn. So what kind of support is Jupiter getting from Saturn? Well, we know that Saturn is in fall in the zodiac sign of Aries, meaning that it has a great deal of difficulty in that sign. The reason is because Aries is associated to spring. Saturn is a winter planet. You don't want a winter planet in a spring sign, which is bringing in a frost or a chill. And you don't want a planet of detours and delays showing up in a zodiac sign of beginnings. So that's basically in a nutshell why Saturn is in fall in the zodiac sign of Aries. So how's Jupiter in Leo? It's very imperial. How's it going to benefit from Saturn? When we remember that Saturn represents everything that's old, it could be old things or old ways of life, and it could also be old people or people that we know from our past, then what we get here is Saturn supporting Jupiter through its aged experience, through having gone through things that maybe Jupiter hasn't gone through yet, or knowing what it's like to be in Jupiter's position. So what might be happening here with Jupiter traveling through the zodiac sign of Leo and really looking over its shoulder back at Saturn and Aries is that you might be experiencing getting advice or counsel from someone who was a failure, from someone who didn't do as well as you did, from someone who had been down the same road you've gone through, but maybe didn't fare as well as you have. Now, this isn't something where you're being charitable, like, oh, I'm going to talk to that, loser. No, it's not like that. It's like people who've experienced failure or people who've experienced struggle or people who haven't gotten the things that they wanted in life. That just doesn't make them bitter, disappointed people, which is often what's described as a Saturnian type of personality. Oh, that person's really bitter, is cynical because they failed in life. No, you can go through failures or disappointments or difficulties, and you can be enriched by those experiences. You can have something to give. Maybe it's more along the lines of like, oh, don't make the same mistakes I made. Or maybe it's along the lines of like, yeah, I used to be part of that rat race and I didn't get very far in it. And actually, I really like my life now outside of that rat race. And you don't have to be married to the hamster wheel that you're stuck on. There's life beyond the tedium of work. So this Saturn-Jupiter trine may be someone who you could learn things from because they're facing things that you're going through and they might not have done as well. And that might be a reason why you would ignore, this person doesn't have anything valuable to impart. But the stars are saying, actually, this person has a lot of valuable things to impart. And don't make the mistake of assuming that just because the person didn't do as well as you, that they don't know what it's like to be in your position in life. Saturn often imparts things that we think are of little value, but actually have tremendous value later on. But sometimes we can mistake it because we mistake the source. We look at the person and we're like, what would this person know about those things? And oftentimes, in fact, more often than not, it's the people who we assume don't know about those things know everything about those situations or those dilemmas that we are facing. And it's because they've gone through them that they have such a wealth of experience to impart and to share. On September 10th, Uranus turns retrograde in the zodiac sign of Gemini. It's not every day when you reverse engines, but this may be one of those rare occasions when you do. The about face, brought about by Uranus's backwards motion, has less to do with beating a retreat and more to do with changing your approach. Maybe you're backtracking to discover the point where things got off track between you and someone else. Or maybe you're deliberately trying to create the impression of leaving to throw rivals off the scent while you circle around and take them by surprise. In any case, it's a good time to take a page from the Gemini playbook, which is it's always a good idea to keep people guessing. On September 27th, Mars enters the zodiac sign of Leo. Now, this is worth noting because Mars is going to be in Leo much longer than we would have initially expected. Mars enters Leo on September 27th, and although Mars enters the zodiac sign of Virgo on November 25th, Mars will then turn retrograde in Virgo and re-enter Leo on February 21st, 2027, where it will reside in the zodiac sign of the Lion until May 1st, 2027. So even though it's broken up, that's a long period of time that Mars will be in the zodiac sign of Leo. But this isn't just Mars traveling by itself in the zodiac sign of Leo. Mars will be accompanying other planets that are associated to Leo or are in fire signs. What happens in this first part when Mars enters Leo on September 27th for the first time, is we will have what's called a Mars translation of light. A translation of light basically hinges on the fastest moving planet of the different planets that are being aspected. And what it does is that it carries the energy of one planet to another planet. I think the best way to think of that is as a relay race, where the runners are racing after one another and they have to pass the baton to another member of their team. And hopefully that's the team that wins. So it's not just a foot race where you race to the finish line. It's a foot race where you're running to catch up to a team member who's waiting to receive a baton from you, who's then going to run and then pass it on to another team member. This is basically how a translation of light works. The fastest moving planet, Mars, is picking up the energy from one planet and moving it to another. So on October 2nd, Mars will trine Neptune in the zodiac sign of Aries. And then on October 16th, Mars will form a trine to Saturn, which is also in Aries, before it culminates in forming a conjunction to Jupiter on November 16th. So this is basically setting up some very powerful fire trines that then culminate with that conjunction to Jupiter on November 16th. And in a way, this is the fiery version of what I was describing earlier with the Venus-Jupiter trine. Remember, we were talking about Venus and Pisces trining Jupiter in Cancer, and that's kind of the approach. And then the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, and that's the fulfillment of the approach. The same idea applies here. Mars is trining Neptune and Saturn. It's a departing trine, just like what I mentioned before with Jupiter departing Saturn in Aries. Mars is in front of the zodiac sign of Aries. It's in Leo, which takes place later in the agricultural year. So Mars is being supported by Neptune and Saturn. and then it forms a conjunction to Jupiter. So what that means is that Mars is getting a lot of support from two planets that it rules, where maybe it's been assigned a task or a mission or a purpose in some way, and it needs to go and meet with a superior, someone who is in a position of authority or leadership in some capacity. And so that leader is the Mars-Jupiter conjunction. So this is where Mars being supported, being given an assignment or mission or something to do, something that needs to be relayed, like that baton, to a person in authority, which is Jupiter. Jupiter rules over benevolent authorities, and that comes to pass on November 16th. So this would be a wonderful time that if you have been encouraged by people to meet someone, or they've provided you with an invitation or a means to go to lunch or dinner with someone, a person of influence, this is when this is all taking place, and this is where it will be fulfilled, because this is what happens when trines become a conjunction. You see a pledge or a promise fulfilled, and this is something that you can definitely look forward to when Mars forms a conjunction to Jupiter on November 16th. On October 2nd, Venus turns retrograde in the zodiac sign of Scorpio. This is the Rethink It Venus retrograde. In other words, you're going to want to rethink a relationship or an association during this period of time, because you might find yourself suddenly in hot water or out of your depth. Part of the reason for this is because Venus is in detriment in the zodiac sign of Scorpio. Venus doesn't do well in Mars-ruled signs, and the Mars-ruled signs are Scorpio and Aries. And the reason why Venus doesn't do well in Mars-ruled signs is because she's named after the goddess of love and beauty and peace. That's what she wants. She wants people to get along. And so when she's traveling through a zodiac sign that's ruled by Mars, named after the god of war, she doesn't really do well in that type of capacity. So when we add the fact that Venus has entered Scorpio, a Mars-ruled sign, where she may find herself out of her depth in a certain situation, there may be expectations that are heavier than what she can, or more demanding than what she can deliver, or she might find herself in concert with personality types that are very domineering or very competitive, or want something from her that she doesn't want to give. These are things that can happen when Venus enters the zodiac sign of Scorpio. She's kind of a magnet for people with questionable pasts. But then we add to it that she turns retrograde. So retrograde is not only a reversal of direction, but Venus goes from attracting the things that she likes to attracting the things she doesn't like when she turns retrograde. So these may be personalities or energies that she doesn't find appealing and isn't really comfortable with. That retrograde then becomes a cazimi, then conjoins the sun exactly on October 23rd, before Venus re-enters the zodiac sign of Libra. What this means is that you may find yourself through a relationship or an association, as I said, out of your depth, out of your element, involved in something that's far too intense and far too questionable, and a situation that you really don't want to be involved in at all. But at the same time, there may be high stakes. You may have to see this commitment through because you gave your word, or there's a lot at stake. You stand to lose a lot if you were to go back on what you promised or what you agreed to. That might be financial, or that might be an emotional investment of some sort. When Venus retrogrades back down into Libra, which is a zodiac sign that she rules, what's nice about this is that Libra is more reasonable energy than a Scorpio energy can be for Venus. In other words, Libra is going to go and take the options and weigh them in the balance and see what is the better way to go. Where Scorpio can tend to be like do or die, or you have to do this or else, Libra is like, who's saying that you have to do this or else? Why is this a do or die situation? Let's take your options. Let's look at this objectively and dispassionately and figure out what you want to do. Plus the fact that Venus is back in this zodiac sign that she rules, like I just mentioned before, this gives you an ability to step out of the situation and to examine things either more rationally or to seek the advice or counsel of people who aren't as personally involved in the situation that you are personally involved in. And so this is something that is going to be beneficial because suddenly you're going to see options and choices where you weren't seeing options and choices before. And this is something that's going to not only be beneficial, but that you can put to use immediately when Venus comes out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Libra on November 13th. On October 15th, Pluto comes out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. A loose end or bit of unfinished business has been hanging over your head for a long time. Maybe it's a career you never pursued, a path you never took, or diploma you never got. In any case, you're motivated to take care of it now. Pluto, coming out of retrograde, often revives past drives and ambitions. But just because they're back on the table doesn't necessarily mean that they're still relevant to who you are now. That can only be determined by going through the process of rediscovery and reacquaintance. Go through this process of rediscovering this path that you didn't take, of reacquainting yourself of what would be required if you were to continue with something that had been given up before. Go through this process, and you'll see where things stand in late January or February. It may seem like an exercise of futility at first, but believe me, you will be made all the richer for it. On November 29th, Uranus in Gemini will trine Pluto in Aquarius. This trine between Uranus and Pluto is extremely rare. And once again, we see the pattern repeating for 2026 of two planets that would usually be adversarial suddenly being in agreement with one another. Now, Uranus's relationship to Pluto isn't adversarial in the same way as Uranus to Saturn or Saturn to Jupiter, but they're adversarial or different is probably the better way of putting it, because Uranus stands for the vault of heaven. It symbolizes the nighttime sky with all of its stars, and Pluto is a planet that is named after the Roman god of the underworld. It rules over all those things that live beneath the earth, that have never glanced up at the stars in the sky, that live in a world of darkness. So with Uranus, which has a tendency to side with more uplifting or enlightened ways of being and seeing, and Pluto, which has a tendency to side more with the instinctual or what you feel in your gut or lies beneath the floorboards of your own horoscope, these are two realms that are very different from one another and have very little traffic with one another until you have something like a trine exist between Uranus and Pluto. This is where you see the revolution and change elements of Uranus being in service to the transformation powers of Pluto. So instead of knocking things over, which could be very Uranian, or obsessing about things, which can be very Plutonian, when they align in a trine like this, Uranus basically becomes a releasing planet. In other words, its enlightenment principles, the things that it sees, takes on the deeper and the more profound dimensions of Pluto, while Pluto, who can be kind of set in its ways, takes on the more enlightened or abstract way of looking at things of Uranus. So for these two planetary energies to come together like this in a trine is very powerful. This might reference events that were going on in your life in the mid-20-teens, the mid-2010s, like maybe around 2015 or so. At that period of time, we had a Uranus-Pluto square, which was very powerful and very tumultuous. And there was this very strong messaging that was coming from the astrological community about the world in conflict, and it was going to go through a tremendous transformation based on feeling very embattled. The energies were struggling with one another. And if you look at 2015 to now, the world has gone through a dramatic transformation, and there's been a lot of battle, and there's been a lot of outcry, and there's been a lot of irreconcilable differences. What happens here with a trine is a reconciliation of irreconcilable differences. And that could come from creating some kind of truce or pact or treaty, or it could come from basically kind of being willing to see the other person's point of view and seeing where the two interests could actually support one another as opposed to being adversarial. Now, I'm not saying that world peace is going to descend from the heavens with Uranus trine Pluto on November 29th, but what I am saying is that we may see a change in many of the conflicts that we're experiencing in the world. Instead of the conflicts being ongoing and non-stoppable, that we might see reason being introduced or some sort of design for living being introduced, where the grievances of the differing parties are being addressed so that they can actually engage in something much more pacifying and sensible and civilized between those two energies. This is something that could bring about a remarkable transformation, not through ordeal and struggle, but through understanding and through harmony and through the realization that perhaps we're better working with one another than we are at going at one another's throats. On November 30th, the Sun in Sagittarius will form a trine to Saturn in the zodiac sign of Aries. This trine between the Sun in Sagittarius and Saturn in Aries is what we call an approaching trine. Many of the trines that I have referred to before have been departing trines. This one is an approaching trine. The Sun is approaching Saturn with an expectation of something. Now, the Sun is currently moving through the zodiac sign of Sagittarius on November 30th. And Sagittarius, as I've referred in other episodes, is very much a zodiac sign of faith. It holds the candlelight in the darkness of winter. And so it's forming a trine to Saturn. Now, a trine to Saturn in Aries, a zodiac sign that Saturn is in fall in, a zodiac sign that doesn't really like Saturn being there because Aries is all about the spring and Saturn has a wintry sort of chill. An approaching trine is kind of like, well, imagine approaching someone in a position of authority that you're expecting to discipline you in some way. If you've ever been called to the principal's office, suddenly, Christopher, the principal wants to see you. Oh, gosh. Remember just chills running through. It still happens when it's like the principal wants to see you. It's just like, oh my God, what? Okay, so this can be an approaching trine. The Sun in Sagittarius is approaching a trine to Saturn. It's like, why am I being called to see the principal? Why am I being called to see someone in a position of authority or power, a disciplinarian? All of those things we associate to Saturn. What have I done wrong? Might be the big question with the Sun-Saturn trine. But it's a trine. It's not a square. It's not an opposition. So it's not anything to be afraid of. It's a trine. It's a harmonious aspect. Your ideas of the person in charge or the person who is the authority, your ideas of this person may be punitive, of expecting the worst, that nothing good will come of this. But instead, what the trine ensures is meet with this person because this person has something benevolent, has something good to impart to you. Now, it might be something as simple as you're not in that much trouble or not in trouble at all. Or it might be something more, which is like, I've called you here today because you've been showing great success, or you've really improved in your performance in some way, and I want to meet with you to see if you're ready to go to the next level. So this might be a promotion of some sort, or it might be someone who's saying, you've shown that you're capable of doing more than what you're doing right now, but what I want to do is check in with you to see if that's your idea of the future, to see if you think that you're capable of handling it. So if it's a promotion in some regard, it's not going to just be like, oh, you've got a promotion and go for it. It's going to be more careful. It's going to be like, I'm thinking of you for this position, but I want to make sure that that works with your life. I want to make sure that that's something that you want. I want to make sure that you can shoulder those responsibilities. So it's actually bringing you into a more collaborative conversation to see if you've got a fit with that expectation that's going to be asked of you. So that's the way that I see the Sun-Saturn trine working, so that instead of being disciplinarian or negative, it's actually going to be positive. But instead of just putting something on your shoulders and saying, now go and be a success, and maybe setting you up for the opposite, which might be failure, it's a real heart-to-heart discussion about whether you feel like you are ready and even what this person in a position of authority can do to help out. Maybe you want to take it slowly. Maybe you want to see what this is like. Maybe you want to discuss this promotion or change of life situation with loved ones and friends. But it's all conducive to you. It's all supportive of you. It's going to ask something of you because it's Saturn, but it's going to ask something of you in which you have to assess what your capabilities and abilities are. And you're working with someone who really wants to set you up for success and not failure. On December 10th, Saturn comes out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries. You might have found yourself stuck on the horns of a dilemma when Saturn turned retrograde in Aries in July. There were no easy answers to your situation, and you've probably been struggling with a crisis of confidence, courage, or direction since. Yet struggles can prove enlightening given enough time. We live in a society that doesn't like time. It expects instant gratification and chat GPT solutions to our predicaments. We don't trust slow, much less sorting things out for ourselves. Yet these past 4.5 months would have taught you the value of retreating from the world to connect with your own spiritual center. Saturn, out of retrograde today, shows that you will emerge from this period of time with the wisdom, self-sufficiency, and grit to steer your life by. On December 12th, Jupiter turns retrograde. Has your luck changed? That's the question you'll be wondering when Jupiter turns retrograde in the zodiac sign of Leo. After weeks of good fortune, you'll find that things will now be a struggle. Now, if your reaction is to abandon the track you're on, then that might say that you weren't truly invested in your journey. However, if you're committed to following your life path wherever it leads, then Jupiter will reward your unwavering faith when it comes out of retrograde on April 13th, 2027. Remember that Jupiter is all about connecting to your own unique higher purpose when it's traveling through Leo. And finally, on December 29th, the Sun in Capricorn forms a square to Saturn in Aries. This is what I call the I can't go on, I'll go on planetary square. That's because we have the Sun in the zodiac sign of Capricorn and its ruling planet Saturn in the zodiac sign of Aries. Now, a Sun-Saturn square works a bit differently if your ruling planet happens to be Saturn. And with the way that I work with ruling planets, a ruling planet is the planet that rules the zodiac sign that you were born under. So basically, if you have a Sun in Capricorn, which is square Saturn in Aries, the Sun in Capricorn is saying, well, this is about as far as I can go. And the Saturn in Aries is saying, oh, I think you can go a bit further. So Sun in Capricorn is a closer. It wants to be able to say, okay, I'm done. This is it. I finished the project. I came to the end of this enterprise. I completed my assignment. I'm done and I'm finished. But Saturn in Aries says, no, you're not. Or you could do more, or you could do a little bit better. And the difference here, I mean, there are a lot of differences between Capricorn and Aries, but the specific difference that I'm trying to describe here is Aries is the zodiac sign of coach dad. So Aries always believes that you can try harder and you can do better. That if you do 25 push-ups, that's great. Tomorrow, you're going to do 50. So there's no such thing as finishing something. If you accomplish something, it's all about raising the bar. So the Sun in Capricorn wants to say, I've accomplished, I'm done, this is it. But the Saturn in Aries is saying, no, there's still something more you can do. Now, your reasonable self, your practical side will say, but I've done everything. There's nothing more to do. This is ridiculous. Why are you raising the bar on this? This is done. It's done to my satisfaction. It's done to the satisfaction of a client or a loved one. Everyone's happy with this. This should be it. But the Saturn in Aries is saying, do you really think that's the best you can do? Do you really think that that's it? And the Sun in Capricorn is like, yeah, sure. And then Saturn in Aries is like, okay, if you think so. And then that kind of open-ended, okay, if you think so, that works. The Capricorn psyche, it's like, did I really do as good as I could have done? I mean, did I really give my utmost? Well, what's wrong with it anyway? So there's a moment where a Capricorn will refuse to go any further and it will justify everything that it's done, and it will run through all the different aspects of the assignment that it was given and check off the boxes and say that's done. But there's still a part of the Capricorn that's like, could it have been better? Did I give it everything that I can? And so that doubt, and Saturn is always about doubt in an astrological chart, that planting the seed of doubt is going to be the thing that makes you like, well, maybe I can do better, damn it. So once you get past the explaining things away or the defensiveness or the I don't have time or anything along those lines, you'll find that there is something more that you could have done and that you will be doing, and that will finally be accomplished when the sun enters the zodiac sign of Aries in the spring of 2027. If you enjoyed what you saw, please press the like button. It helps more than you know. If you could subscribe, that would be wonderful. I've had such a wonderful time visiting with you this week, and I can't wait to get together next time on Christopher Renstrom Astrology.